Hi, I'm Logan Medish, host of the High Caliber History podcast, and on this episode of the show, my guest has spent more than 30 years working in a variety of different aspects of the historic arms industry, including having spent a lot of time on the Antiques Roadshow, and we're going to discuss some of the amazing finds he's seen there. We're also going to discuss guns owned by Henry VIII, and we'll even talk about his bird hunting experiences with a flintlock. It's going to be a good episode, and I know that you're going to enjoy it. And if you enjoy the content that you're finding on this podcast, a reminder that we are entirely viewer and listener supported, and so we'd appreciate you considering becoming a supporter on Patreon. There will be a link in the description below. All right, without further ado, let's get into the episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the High Caliber History podcast. My guest on the show today is Bill Harriman, and he has spent a career of more than 35 years as a consultant specializing in the examination and classification of firearms, ammunition, and related items. A list of positions he has both held in the past or currently holds includes the Director of Firearms for the British Association for Shooting and Conservation, a member of the Home Office Historic Firearms Reference Panel, Firearms and Militaria Specialist for the BBC's version of Antiques Roadshow. He's one of only 7 honorary historic consultants to the Royal Armouries in Leeds, and he's the author of multiple book titles, including ones on the mosin-nagant and Arisaka rifles, with a 5th forthcoming title on bayonets, which will be due out on April 15th from Osprey Publishing. Bill, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Logan. It's great to see you all.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. So we'll jump right into it. How did you get your interest in firearms history?
Do you know what? I can't recall a time, even when I was a pretty small boy, when I wasn't interested.
Okay.
I don't know where it came from, but I have a faint memory of being at my aunt's house, and her French windows were open onto the patio. And behind one of the curtains, there was an old Birmingham Small Arms Company airgun, which was my dad's, which I've actually got. It's in the rack behind me, funnily enough.
Cool.
And that was being used to deal with rats on Auntie's lawn. And I thought, that really interests me. And it appeared at the time that it was about 6 foot long, but
sure.
I've always been interested in them. And when I went away to school, I can remember taking 4 or 5 books on firearms, and I've still got a couple of them, and they're just about falling to pieces. So I was always interested.
Okay. Well, that's cool to have a lifelong interest, and I think it's that way for a lot of us who are arms enthusiasts. We get into stuff generationally, like you said, seeing the old guns sitting there. And that's, I've been into them all my life. My grandfather got me into them at a young age, as listeners to the show will have heard me talk about him before. So yeah.
Well, you say it's generational. If I tell you that my father did his level best to stop me being interested in them,
really,
I can only tell you that he was a complete failure.
Well, then we have something else in common there too. My dad didn't try to stop my interest in guns, and neither did my mom, but neither of them had an interest in guns. So we've got that generation jump there too in common, I guess.
My father was an officer in the Royal Air Force in the Second World War, so he handled a lot of firearms. And
sure.
We had a few around at home, but he wasn't that interested in them. But funnily enough, the moment that I said, I'm really interested in that, he said, no, you don't want to see that. I think he was probably frightened I might shoot him.
Oh, goodness. Well, that's...
He was also an engineer, and I suspect that probably some of my fairly limited ability to work on guns has come down genetically from that.
That's funny. So I mentioned in the bio that you've been on the BBC's version of Antiques Roadshow for a number of years, and I've spent my entire life watching the American version, and also have dallied into watching episodes of the BBC version when I ran out of new episodes on the one here stateside. A number of years ago, my wife and I had the opportunity to go to a filming of one of the road shows here when it came to Washington, D.C., and that was really neat to get that kind of behind the scenes view of how the show works. But for someone who has spent so much time as a consultant with the roadshow, what's it like working on the roadshow? And do you have any favorite pieces that have come through your tables there?
So, certainly, it's hard work because you're plowing through a lot of stuff which is not very consequential, shall we say. Yet, Yet, I'm trying to be diplomatic, yet you cannot say to somebody, I don't see that, that's a load of rubbish, because they have probably been standing in a queue for 2 or 3 hours and it's their day out. You've got to give them the very best experience that you can.
Yeah.
So while something might not be worth very much money or not very exciting, you need to tell them what it is, everything that you know about them, and make it enjoyable.
Right.
So that can be very wearing when you say we start at 9 o'clock and we're normally done by about 5:30 or something like that. If you've had some of these great volume crowds that we've had, you really feel sort of pressed in after a while.
Sure.
But I have to say that it's more than 35 years of doing it, I can only ever remember one really unpleasant and objectionable person.
Well, that's good.
I think he had come thinking that, having paid a lot of money for whatever it was he had brought, my mind slips as to what it was, but when I told him it, A, wasn't what he thought it was, and B, he'd paid far too much for it, he got very, very aggressive.
Yeah, that's... A fool and his money are often separated,
Indeed.
Yeah, and that's a shame, and we see it here too. Guys, they spend a ton of money on something, a gun, because someone told them it was something special, or they didn't know anything about it and they were told it would be a good investment. And that's always a shame. I always tell people, or people get caught up in the story of the gun. I say, buy the gun, not the story, because the story could be absolute bunk.
Indeed. I spend my life myth busting.
Yeah, absolutely. So have there been any really cool pieces that stick out in your mind?
I think the most important piece that I can be sure was important was a Charles Lancaster 4-barreled officers. They're known as Howder pistols, and it was in I think it was in either 4.45 or it might have been a 4.76. It was a 4-barrel thing, and it would fire 4 shots, and they were preferred quite often because revolvers used to jam. Mm-hmm. And so with this, you had 4 shots.
Sure.
This was made, I think, in the very early 1880s. It was very finely engraved all over, and then on top of the engraving, there was a gold plating, a wash of rather a subtle matte gold, not like a sort of gold-plated tap that a rich person might have on a yacht. And then the grips were made from ivory, and it was presented in its original wooden case, which was made from a rare wood, which I'm told was Coromandel wood. And the mounts on the box were gilt bronze, and it was on some, I think it was purple, it might have been blue, silk velvet cloth, and it had been presented by the manufacturer, Charles Lancaster, who is a London gunmaker, to Sir Garnet Wolsey, who was the foremost British soldier of the Victorian age. And he'd clearly given him this to say, how about giving us a contract for these, Sir Garnet? It was just like Sam Colt.
Yes, absolutely. That's very cool, and that's a neat connection to make, to compare him to Colt, because folks over here are obviously very familiar with Sam's business savvy.
Yeah. At the other end of the scale, a lady brought to me something which she described as a piece of rubbish, and I looked at it, and it was actually a wooden water bottle, or canteen as you call them in America. And I am absolutely certain that it dated from the Napoleonic Wars. And when you think about the potential survivability of these things, because they were wood, they were probably thrown on the fire when they were broken. You would have got another one from the quartermaster. And any surplus ones tended to be sold off after wars.
Sure.
So this was such a rare survivor. And you wondered whether or not this had walked its way around Spain with one of Wellington's soldiers. And on a really hot day, he was going, oh, that's better. Oh, yes. And that to me was just so interesting. And this lady said, I don't know why you're so interested in it. I was going to throw it on the fire.
Oh, my goodness.
I had to speak very sharply to her and tell her to really preserve it.
Yeah.
But I think it has gone into the National Army Museum because there's so very few of them about.
Yeah, that's the same way here. Same time period you mentioned, Napoleonic time period. So there'd be, War of 1812 era over here, and I happened to be, it was almost a year ago now. There's a big antique arms show in Las Vegas, and I was out there with a colleague, and he was stopped at a table and enamored by some 1812 era wooden canteens that had soldiers' names and units on them, and it's just perfect stuff that other people would walk right past,
Yeah.
So
if you should never ignore things that appear to be mundane, because generally they're quite important.
Yeah,
that's my experience.
And it's kind of funny that if she thought it was rubbish and she was going to throw it on the fire, makes you wonder why she thought to bring that piece to the roadshow anyway.
I think she might have brought it simply to get through the gates so that she could be part of the experience. A lot of people bring things that they think, I'd like to go to that roadshow filming today. What have I got, Guthrie? I've got this penknife. I'll take that.
Right. Okay. See, when my wife and I went, we made sure to think long and hard. We're like, all right, what's something that we think is actually worthwhile, So, but we're antique bugs anyway, and so
yes.
we're a little more conscious with that. I want to go back to the Lancaster 4-barrel. The person who brought that, how did they acquire it? And, obviously by its appearance, they knew it was something special, but, were they clued into exactly what they had, or did you have to give kind of a complete education on that for them?
I think they had some concept that it was important. I'm just trying to rack my brains. I think there was some very distant family connection with the general, probably 3 generations ago, and his distant descendants thought that this was an important thing. It came into Winchester, which is in the southern part of the UK, when we were doing the roadshow from Winchester Cathedral. And I have to say, it was the best ever thing that I think I've ever seen on the roadshow. With one possible exception, I may have seen a Patterson Colt. I could not be sure whether it was a real one, but it had every look that it might have done, and it certainly wasn't an aged-up Italian modern replica. It was old, but I couldn't be sure. And I would want it to be looked at by someone who had seen several Patterson Colts and really had a feel for them. I'd only ever seen one before, and that's a great distance and a very long time ago.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that gun up, because in me doing my background research on you so that I was as prepared as I could be, I spent some time on the Roadshow's website looking for video clips just with you in them. And obviously over such a long career with them, there's quite a few, but I actually honed in on that Patterson clip because I love early Colts as well. And I think they're absolutely fascinating, and to see one over there is interesting. They're rare enough over here, but to come across one over there was really, really neat.
They're certainly very well documented, and to find one that had just come out of the woodwork was
right.
Really very odd, and that makes me slightly suspicious. I think there was one that was found in the house of an elderly lady in the north part of the country that was then sold for, I think it made £250,000. It was pretty special.
Wow.
And it was worth more than her house was worth. and she had struggled in poverty for all her life.
Oh, my goodness. And to think she had something right there that could have solved all that. My goodness. That is something. Now, I have had a couple guests on the show from the Royal Armouries in Leeds. And of course, you have a connection there as being one of only 7 of their honorary historical consultants. So tell us what exactly is an honorary historic consultant, and how did you find yourself in such esteemed company?
I think that I was made an honorary historical consultant because I'd done quite a bit of work with the Royal Armouries, and particularly, again, there's a roadshow connection here. We had a lady turn up with a pair of pistols that belonged to General John Jacob, who was an Indian Army officer who made a projectile, which is an explosive projectile, and he was generally into his firearms. And the Royal Armouries had got a lot of his pistols, and I think one of his rifles. And I managed to obtain a very long-term loan for the Armouries of these pistols, and they're on display. And I think that the then master of the Armouries thought, yes, we'll have you. And that's why I was given this honorary position. And I'm really there if they want any advice. Mm-hmm. And it's quite useful. It doesn't get you into places. I can say, any chance of looking at the so-and-so exhibition before it starts?
Sure.
It's one of those symbiotic relationships that if they want my help, I'm very happy to give it. And also, if I want to go and look in the reserve collection or something like that at something, then I can generally get in. I'm only 2 hours away. And so consequently, it's really quite handy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I have found it in my career with museums as well, that it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I have had the esteemed privilege of going behind the scenes in a lot of different collections that otherwise I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do. And but one day I plan on calling in a favor over there at the Royal Armouries and trying to see the background, whether it's with Jonathan Ferguson or Lisa Traynor or someone along those lines.
I know Jonathan and Lisa very well. They are excellent people. And,
yes.
If ever you're going to be over there, let me know, and perhaps we could meet up.
That would be great. We'll have to make a big meeting of it. We'll get the 4 of us together. We'll drag Jonathan and Lisa along as well.
I think that would be very good. I'd be very, very pleased to show you my collection as well.
I would love to see it. and you have amassed quite a wonderful collection over the years, and I know you've seen and had a number of impressive pieces in your hands over the years through all your different hats that you've worn. But I'm curious to know, what are a couple of the really impressive key pieces or key moments or experiences that you've had in your career? What sticks out as the feathers in your cap?
I thought long and hard about this, Logan, and it's a ferociously difficult question to answer.
It's like asking someone. It's like asking someone if they have a favorite kid. It's a hard one to answer, but at the end of the day, they do have a favorite kid.
They do indeed. Yeah, I split it into 3 areas, if you like.
Okay.
And one thing which I'm very proud of was that I was made the president of the Muzzle Loaders Association of Great Britain. Now, that again is an honorary position. I'm wheeled out to say something, or if they want advice, I'm there. But just to be president of an association which does nothing other than shoot guns which you load from the front end, then
right.
That suits me very well. I'm really very honoured by that. The next one, we're back to the Royal Armouries again. I was in the reserve collections, and I looked at this gun. I thought, I know what that is, and it was a muzzle-loading gun that belonged to King Henry VIII.
Oh, wow.
Was really the first English monarch to own a firearm. And he really got England starting to adopt firearms. And in fact, the Venetian ambassador, writing one of his dispatches back to Venice, said, His Majesty has enough guns to conquer hell.
That's a great phrase.
Yeah, I thought that was really good. Anyhow, I looked at this and I said to whoever was looking after me, may I pick this up? And we put the white gloves on and all of the usual protective things that you would do with an artifact that was old as that. And I was actually able to put it into my shoulder, and my cheek had been on the same cheek piece on the stock as His Majesty's had.
Wow. That's very cool.
Yeah, presumably somewhere there's a sort of mixture of our DNA.
That is really, really cool. There's a firearm in the NRA Museum collection where I worked that was a piece that was owned by Napoleon Bonaparte. And it too has a velvet cheek piece on it, and I've had the opportunity to hold and shoulder that as well. So for better or worse, maybe Bonaparte and I are mingling the DNA there as well. As long as I don't end up exiled on Elba, I think I'll be okay.
Well, you could always ask for me to be in charge of your guard, and we'd have a good time.
Hey, there you go. There's worse ways to spend some time.
Yeah, and my last one is really a hunting anecdote.
Okay.
I was out with two friends of mine, and we were shooting. Well, really, whatever came around over gun dogs with flintlock guns.
Very cool.
I was using a gun made by H.W. Mortimer, who is a fairly well-respected English gunmaker. He was gunmaker in order to King George III. And there was a woodcock. I think in the States you call them timber doodles. I'm not certain.
Okay.
Anyway, there was a woodcock got up, and they are very difficult birds to shoot because they jink.
Okay.
And I clearly got onto this bird very quickly before it had a chance to start jinking. And I fired, and there's this great white cloud. And just on the side of it, there was this little brown thing fell away. I thought, I've hit it, and there's nobody more surprised than me, I can tell you. And I couldn't find it.
Oh, no.
And the other guys were saying, you've missed it. You've missed it. You didn't stand a chance of hitting it. And I said, right, bring me the best nosed dog that we have today. And this very, very venerable gun dog was brought up. And I said to the dog, biscuits for life if you find it. He went into the thick, rummaged around in there. He was there for quite a long time, and then walked out with it in his mouth.
Oh, that's so cool.
And to shoot a woodcock, one of the hardest flying targets, in a proper hunting scenario with a gun made in 1824, then I really wonder when the last person in Great Britain shot a woodcock with a flintlock.
You're probably the only one alive, you know?
Could be. Could be.
That's, yeah, you're right there. Wing shooting is hard enough as it is trying to get the lead right, but let alone not only having to get the lead right, but also having to deal with the slight delay of ignition with the flintlock. I mean, that just adds so much more complexity to the situation.
Yes, I was fortunate in this instance in that the delay didn't really matter because the bird was going away.
Ah, okay.
And I think that contributed to it. And what really pleased me was these two other chaps I was shooting with. One of whom is about the nearest thing I have to a brother and a very great friend, and the other one is a professional colleague. They're very much better shots than me, and they spent hours after that sitting around waiting to see whether they could shoot a woodcock. And you know what? They never have.
No kidding. That's cool. Well, those are three very cool things, and show by their difference just how wide of a breadth of an amazing career that you've had. One thing that I want to ask you about, and this is one I didn't prep you on, so I'm going to spring it on you because I just became aware of it recently. The venerable gunmaker Holland and Holland, which, of course, has been owned by Chanel, oddly enough, for a number of years, has recently been acquired by Beretta, which, of course, is the oldest gun maker in the world. And I'm curious, I have my own thoughts, but what are your thoughts on that impressive British brand being purchased by an impressive Italian brand?
I think that you have always found that English gun-making houses that produce the very high end of luxury guns will always be attractive to a luxury goods group, if you like. So I believe Purdy's are, or they used to be owned by the Von Dom Group.
Right.
And of course, Holland's, as you say, was Chanel. And if it means that these survive, then I'm all for it, because clearly there isn't very much of a market for a gun which costs upwards of 70,000 English pounds, which is quite a lot of money.
It is, yeah. It's a lot of money. It is.
If I say the most expensive firearm that I own is probably worth about £2,500, and that puts it into its context.
Right. Yeah, I could add up all the guns in my collection and it wouldn't equal what a new Holland and Holland would cost, But I personally, I'm hopeful with them being owned by another firearms company again.
That's a very good thing, I think.
Yeah, because anyone who has watched Holland and Holland over the years, they've steered into a very weird world of fashion, and I think they've become a clothing brand that also happens to make guns on the side, which for the longest time baffled me until I realized that they were owned by Chanel, and then it made a little more sense. I didn't like it, but it made a little more sense. So I'm hopeful that Beretta, being their new parent company, will help steer them back to their firearm roots, if you will.
Certainly. I think that's a very perceptive comment. Funnily enough, my boss for the job I work at the moment, his daughter worked for Holland's for several years in the clothing division before she went to be a journalist.
Okay.
So next time I see her, I'll have a word and see what the lowdown is.
Yeah, that'd be great. Get the inside scoop. Very cool. Well, we've spent a good deal of time talking about shooting things. And so let's shift from shooty things to pointy things and talk about bayonets and your upcoming book. Bayonets are often today kind of seen as just accessories in the periphery. But of course, there were periods of time where the bayonet really changed how armies functioned and often led to them winning battles and wars. So talk to us a bit about the changing world of bayonets and what led you to going, you know what, we need a book on these.
I got a lot of books on bayonets in my bookshelf just over there, but they're all catalogues. They will say this bayonet was used by Argentina, and then it will go through other nations and end with Zambia or a nation that starts with Z.
Right.
And they're excellent for collectors because they say that's what you've got, and this is the first type, and that's very rare.
Mm-hmm.
What they don't do, and what prompted me to make this approach to Osprey, was that they didn't really deal with the history and the sort of little bits that come together to see how bayonets fit into the developmental part of history for military history. People take them for granted. They're a knife that goes on the end of this gun.
Right.
They are. That's all you need to know. But they're not. They're very much more subtle. And if you think of the way that an army was constituted in, say, 1645, which is about the time when bayonets came out, there is infantry troops. There are two distinct types in varying proportions, depending on what army it was. There were the sort of impact or shock troops armed with pikes, and then there were troops who were missile troops called the shot, who were armed with muskets. So the two had to work in concert. Mm-hmm. The pikemen guarded the musketeers whilst they were loading, because it was quite a long process loading a musket. And the musketeers could deal with any threats to the pikemen at some distance. So you got the two working as a symbiotic relationship. Then by about the 1680s, when somebody had decided it was quite a good idea to put a pointed object on the end of a firearm, and I don't think it was derived from somebody just pushing a knife in. Uh-huh. I think it was probably a broken pike or something like that. It was probably the result of desperation, and somebody just stuck that into the muzzle of their musket and suddenly thought, hang on, I've got both a defensive and an offensive weapon here, and that's how this developed. So the plug bayonet, which you stuffed into the muzzle, and you couldn't fire the gun with it in there; it would be highly dangerous.
Yeah.
They started to be more common, and by the 1680s or thereabouts, you start to see them beginning to proliferate. They were very useful for troops like dragoons, who were really mounted infantry. They could protect themselves with that. They didn't need a whole load of pikemen. So they could have that mobility of their horses, and yet if they were attacked whilst they were dismounted or attacked by cavalry, they could then use their plug bayonets to protect themselves. Then by about 1700, you see the infantry soldier losing that distinction of either being a pikeman or a musketeer, and being a soldier armed with a flintlock musket and a socket bayonet. And all armies looked exactly like that. The only thing that differentiated them was the colour of their coats.
Right.
So you have changed the character of an army. And from, shall we say, about 1700 to about 1840, the socket bayonet and musket-armed infantryman was universal. Mm-hmm. And consequently, you get the ability for a formation that's efficient to disorder its enemy with a couple of sharp volleys, fix its bayonets, and then charge over a relatively short distance, so shall we say 100, 200 yards, before they could reload. And it's very clear that there were very few bayonet fights because one side generally ran away if they had any sense. It's very interesting to read the comments of an army surgeon who was called, I think he was called Major Guthrie. And he said, normally one side will run away from the other, discretion being the better part of valour.
That's good. I like that.
And if you think about it, that's dead true. If you are part of a formation that's just been disordered by several really good volleys or by British rolling platoon fire, you're not going to stand around with a whole load of screaming lunatics running at you with very long, sharp, pointed things on the end of their guns. You're going to run away.
Right. Yeah. Fight or flight kicks in and flight takes over.
Yeah. And then the danger comes that from about 1840, the bayonet has acquired such a reputation that commanders think it's invincible.
Right.
And from then till about the end of the First World War, you start to see horrific casualties caused by bayonet charges. Mm-hmm. To give an example, Pigot's charge at Gettysburg.
Yes.
That was a terribly long run-up. And the Pickett's division were just shot to bits before they even got there.
Yeah, they had no chance.
But they had this sort of misguided belief that if you send a man to attack somebody with a bayonet, he's invincible.
Right.
Franco-Prussian War. There were a lot of Prussian units were really shot up, probably losing, sort of a third of their effective strength in minutes mm-hmm. by French soldiers armed with chassepôts at long range because the Prussians were trying to close with them.
Right.
And the ultimate is the senseless slaughter in the First World War, where time and time again people were sent over the top with bayonets. Yeah. And a bayonet against a machine gun isn't a lot of good.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So then, when people really worked out that it's not such a good idea to mount mass bayonet attacks, but a soldier armed with a bayonet is quite useful in certain tactical situations. It might be whereby a quick charge with bayonets would push an enemy off a feature or something like that. Mm-hmm. I think the last bayonet charge that the British Army did en masse, which used something more than a couple of individuals. There was a company attack on Mount Tumbledown in the Falklands War in 1982 by the Scots Guards, who charged some Argentinians, and the company commander, fighting with Argentinians on the summit of Mount Tumbledown, he actually broke his bayonet.
Oh.
And there is a really, I think, very cool connection here, because one of the platoon commanders, the lieutenants who helped to lead this charge, was a former colleague of mine.
Oh, no kidding.
Yep.
Wow. Small world, right?
Alistair describes the event as the most scary thing he's ever done.
I bet. My goodness. Yeah. God, a bayonet charge in the 1980s. That's just...
yes.
You go, wait, say that again? That's just, you do not think of that,
Well, I have to say, as a young soldier in the 1970s, we used to do bayonet drill.
Really?
Yeah. On a Wednesday night, I was in your equivalent of the National Guard. We used to turn up to our drill hole on a Wednesday night, and if there was nothing else much happening, we used to be lined up, have bayonets put on our Belgian self-loading rifles, the SLR that the British adopted. It was a very good rifle. I liked that. I felt safe with it.
Well, that's important.
And we would stand opposing each other, doing and high port and butt smash. And then we would be sent outside to the tank park, where there was a whole load of hanging dummies, and we were encouraged to charge them and scream and shout as much as you pleased. I have to say, you get a feeling of invulnerability when you do that.
Right. Wow. That's wild. Yeah, I've never done anything like that, so that's interesting to think. And I bet the screaming and hooting and hollering makes all the difference in the world. You know,
oh yes, it makes the other side run away, and you feel a hell of a lot better for doing it.
Right. Absolutely.
We did have an injury with a bayonet on one night when somebody hadn't quite put it properly on the end of his rifle when he fixed it, and he thrust out, and it flew off and stuck in some other chap's foot.
Oh my goodness!
They had to call for the medical orderly and all kinds of things.
Oh my gosh!
The commanding officer took the view after that. I think enough's enough.
Oh, how about that? In the firearms world, there are a lot of myths and misconceptions that get thrown around about certain guns and this and that. But the same is true for bayonets. There's a lot of things that people don't understand, or, it's stories that get told over and over and over until they become supposed truths. So are there some bayonet myths and misconceptions that you'd like to dispel?
Yeah, I think that there are. This is a German First World War Mauser, known as the butcher knife bayonet.
Right.
And you can see there's that hollow groove on it. And people say, oh, that's there to allow the blood to flow down when you stick it in.
Right.
But it's not. It's there to lighten the bayonet without it losing its strength. If you grind two grooves into it, it becomes very, very rigid, and it lines it off. You've probably lost several ounces of weight from that, which is all counts when you're an infantryman who's got to walk around with it.
Absolutely. Ounces make pounds, and pounds make pain.
They do. Also, you get a lot of bayonets. Certainly in the German army around about the First World War, about 6% of them were made with a saw on the back.
Mm-hmm.
And again, people say, oh, they're to inflict horrible wounds. Well, actually, if you have a saw on there, it's going to make it less effective as a penetrator.
Right.
What the saw was there for was that you turned it upside down and you could saw things with it.
Right. Becomes multi-purpose.
Yes. There's always this concept of making a bayonet do something else as well. And I think the funniest one that's absolutely cracked me up when I read about it was the trials of the US trowel bayonet in the 1870s.
Yes.
And I can't believe that General Sherman himself actually said these are really good. A man I've always admired for his tactical ability and his wisdom and wit, and he thought that putting a spade on the end of a gun was a good idea.
Right. Yeah. The two that really get me are, one, the trowel bayonet, and two, oh my gosh, now I'm blanking on the exact word that I need to use, but the cleaning rod bayonet, the rod, that's as simple as that, the rod bayonet on the Springfield 03.
The rod bayonet was dreadful. I've got a trapdoor Springfield 4570 that's got a rod bayonet on it, and it's appalling.
Yeah.
You just wouldn't want to fight anybody armed with it. I'd run away. Yeah.
No, you might as well just attack them with your cleaning rod, because that's essentially what you were doing.
Right, yes.
Oh,
do you know that Teddy Roosevelt got the Springfield rod bayonet stopped?
Yep.
There's that very famous letter when he was sitting in the White House, and there was some general expounding on how wonderful this rod bayonet was, and he sort of scratched his chin and thought, I don't really think so. So he apparently called the Marine Sentry and said, lend me your rifle, son. And he got a Craig Jorgensen, which has got a very nice, very handy knife bayonet on it. And he made a couple of passes at the general with his rod bayonet and broke it in half. And funnily enough, about 6 months after that, the Springfield had the M1905 sword bayonet on it, which was a very good bayonet. But in terms of the tactical situation in the First World War, it was too long for trench fighting, but it was a good bayonet.
Yeah.
And certainly cut down and then purpose-built. They were excellent bayonets when used on the Garand.
Yes, very good bayonets, and they it's one of those things from a collector's standpoint that make some of these adaptations and failures so incredibly popular. You know, the rod bayonet is an abject failure, but now to find an 03 Springfield that's still got its original rod bayonet is that's a big plus for a collector. Or to find one of the 05 bayonets that didn't get cut down for the Garand, you'll pay hundreds of dollars for those, so it's interesting, the adaptation and what does and does not become collectible out of that.
And I think one myth that has grown up from the saw-backed bayonet was that any German soldier who was caught with one was summarily executed.
I've heard that.
And I just simply don't believe it. That you would have thought that, West, you might not want to shout about what you've done. Word would have got round that we caught these Germans with saw bayonets and we shot them immediately. And I think that comes from a passage in All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque, who wrote it in 1922, I think it was. And he was referring to German soldiers who've been caught with these things who are executed summarily in horrible ways, but there's no evidence. And I think because All Quiet on the Western Front was such a great seller, people read it and they believed it.
Right.
That's my theory. That's in the book.
There you go. And for another theory, I'm curious, the supposed blood groove on the bayonet. Do we have any idea? Do you know where that myth came from?
No, I think it's just one of those ideas that somebody looked at it and they thought, what's that for? Oh, it must be to let the blood out.
Right. And there are enough people that go, oh, that makes sense. And it grows legs and walks on for decades.
Absolutely. And people are bloodthirsty. They like things like that. They think, ooh, yeah, that's the blood out.
Exactly. Now, so as we wrap up, there's one final question. And I ask everybody on the show, and I'm curious to know, what firearms designer or bayonet designer from history would you most want to meet and why?
It would have to be Sam Colt.
Yeah?
Absolutely. I've always really been interested in Sam Colt. I own a few Colts myself.
Uh-huh.
And I think I would want to meet him because he didn't invent the revolver, but he perfected it. And then having perfected it, he marketed it.
Yes.
We go back to the Patterson, which we've already spoken of. I am not rich enough to own a real one, I'm afraid. So
you and me both.
You're quite right. I have to say that I have got a very good Italian copy of a number 5 Texas model with the loading lever. Uh-huh. And I have to say that is one of the favourite firearms that I own. I sometimes of an evening just sit and think, that was probably the most important development in firearms history. Because it showed the world that repeating firearms were a practicality. And everything goes back to that.
Yeah.
So I would very much like to have met Sam Colt. In terms of bayonet designers, the bayonet designer that I would really like to meet and give a piece of my mind to is the person who designed that appalling bayonet for the British SA-80 rifle. Have you seen one?
I don't know that I have, and I'm sure it's in Jonathan Ferguson's upcoming book that has the SA-80 in it, but I haven't got the book yet because it's not out. So please do tell what is the bayonet and what is the issue?
The bayonet has a Bowie knife blade and a sort of strange hollow socket. The blade's set to one side of the socket.
Okay.
And the socket goes over the flash hide of the rifle.
Okay.
Why you would want to put a bayonet on a rifle that's about that long, I've no idea.
Yeah, a bayonet on a bullpup is odd at best.
I'm told it cost over £1 million to develop, and quite frankly, I could have done a better job on the back of a cigarette packet.
Right. Oh my gosh.
They're also their investment cast into ceramics, and consequently, certainly they were the one I was issued with was very, very brittle, because within about a week of it being issued to me, I broke it.
No kidding.
I dropped it on the concrete floor when I was going out the armory, and the end snapped off.
Wow.
The squadron quartermaster sergeant was very cross. He said, "You've broken that, sir. You'll have to pay for it." I said, "Can't you just push it under the carpet, as it were?" Right. I didn't like the SA-80 either. Within days, I'd broken mine as well. I'm careful with firearms. I sort of respect them, but
right.
I can only describe it as a piece of tin and plastic rubbish.
Goodness.
Quite why we didn't see sense and either go for a Kalashnikov made under license or your excellent M16 under license.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I would say about the M16 is I'm a bit dubious about a rifle that has to have a bolt forward assist thing on it.
Well, and so was Eugene Stoner. He wasn't keen on it either, It was why would you want to force something into the chamber that doesn't want to go,
Yes.
You're absolutely right. It doesn't make sense.
Other than that, when I fired an M16 or equivalent of it, I've liked it. I thought it was a good rifle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we call them adult Legos over here because they're just so adaptable and changeable,
Well, there's all kinds of bells and whistles on them these days, aren't there? Rails and torches, you name it. Yep. I have to say, I'm a bit more traditionalist in my taste of firearms, and really, my collection, well, it's done by the end of the First World War.
Okay. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. You like what you like, enough, and
quite. And you like what you're interested in. And funnily enough, the earliest firearm that I have in my collection is an American Hall.
Ooh! Now, is it in flintlock or has it been converted to percussion?
It's a converted one.
Okay.
But that doesn't particularly bother me. I might buy a flintlock. I've got a Hall carbine as well, which I bought fairly recently. I think it was last year from an auction, and that's very interesting. I've fired them both, and
cool.
I have to say, I'm amazed by the amount of gas that comes out of. but you know what? I got in a foxhole on a military range, and firing at a human size. It's known as a figure 11 target. It's about the same size as a man standing there. Mm-hmm. At 100 yards, I could hit it 7-8 times out of 10. At 200 yards, the hit rate hadn't diminished very much, and the speed of loading, I was getting something like about 8 to 10 shots a minute off easily, comfortably, taking careful aim,
right.
And if you think that you were being attacked by a mass formation, then they would have been in some very serious problems.
Yeah. Yeah, the Hall rifle fascinates me.
It does me as well.
Yeah. Yeah, Hall, and I used to live only about 30 minutes from Harper's Ferry, and so I would spend a good bit of time going there. And, Hall was every bit an engineer and a machinist and a tinkerer as he was a gunsmith, and he doesn't really get his due in the firearms scene, and unfortunately there's nothing left of any of his buildings there at Harper's Ferry. There's very few left anyway, but his particular rifle works is long gone, and it's a shame because I would love to be able to just go and stand where he stood, and just the precision that he had things done with was just remarkable and just fantastic. I would love to own a Hall one day.
Well, I hope you do. I've enjoyed both of mine, and I've actually fired mine with just the with just the breech block as a pistol.
Yes. Yes.
And I have to say it was exciting, and I'm very glad I wore gloves.
Yeah, I would love to do that as well, because I've heard stories, like of guys doing it like on the Texas frontier and stuff, using them just as the pistols.
It was Sam Chamberlain in the Mexican War who stood off a whole load of Mexicans who were intent on doing him a mischief. They were all armed with knives. I think he'd gone down to the cantina for a few beers after a hard day, and all these locals didn't like the look of him. They all produced knives, but because he'd got the only firearm, or apparently the only firearm, they all ran away.
Yeah,
but I just think that's a fantastic story.
It is. That's don't bring a knife to a gunfight, right?
No.
Oh, that's great. Well, Bill, I really appreciate you spending some time on here, and it's been great. We've talked about mixing DNA with Henry VIII and blood grooves and all sorts of great stuff, and the Roadshow, and just awesome stuff. And I really appreciate it, and I'm really looking forward to the new Bayonet book coming out. Again, that's coming out on April 15th from Osprey Publishing. There will be a link to Osprey below, so I encourage everybody to pick up a copy when it comes out. So once again, Bill Harriman, thank you for coming on the High Caliber History Podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the High Caliber History Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed taping it with my guest, Bill Harriman, and I hope to see you here on the next episode of the show. And if you enjoyed it, again, remember that we are entirely viewer and listener supported, and so we'd appreciate you considering making a donation over on our Patreon, which is going to be linked in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you on the next episode.